graduated from high school testing below the basic reading level. And more than 42 million Americans, adults, are functionally illiterate, which means they can't even follow the directions on a can of soup. Now, how and why did this happen? And what does this say about the way we're educating our children? So hi, I'm Barbara Wilkov, and I'm part of the team here at BookTrib.com, where readers come to discover. Nice to be with you today. And here to shed some light on the subject is Dr. Claire Rubman. She's a cognitive and developmental psychologist who has taught in the classroom for over 30 years. She's a college professor on Long Island in New York. She has raised 3 of her own children and has seen the struggle firsthand. And now she's written a most provocative book. This may be difficult to read, but you really should for your child's sake. So welcome, Claire. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me, Barbara.
My pleasure. I actually find this book very, personally interesting because I was a 3rd grade teacher for a number of years. So, this really means a lot to me. Just starting out, Claire, why did you write this book?
So we've got 50 years of research and it's sitting gathering dust. And the truth of the matter is that parents need this information. It's available, it's useful, it's wonderful research. And if parents had it at their fingertips, maybe we could deal with the reading crisis that's occurring in this country.
Yes, that's very true. So from your work, what can you tell us about why this condition exists and why so many students are entering college below the basic reading level?
Right, as you mentioned, 1 in 5 college freshmen have to take a remedial reading class. And yet parents do a wonderful job of trying to teach their children before they even step foot in kindergarten, in the kindergarten classroom. So what's going on? What's the disparity there between what parents are trying to accomplish and what children are actually doing by the time they get to middle school, high school, and college? And so the truth of the matter is, look, parents do a wonderful job. They teach their children colors, they teach them shapes, they teach them letters, and they teach them sounds. And some parents even teach their children to say the words out loud. But what parents are not doing is the problem. Parents are not teaching their children to comprehend the written word. And the research suggests that there are 4 or 5 missing steps in the comprehension process that if parents just taught their children these skills, their children would succeed much better. The book is, you mentioned you're a teacher. The book is validation for teachers. Teachers know all this, but for parents, through no fault of their own, the research hasn't reached them quite yet. And so this book is a bridge between what the research says and what parents need in their homes. And it's not additional work. It's just making reading part of their everyday lives.
So you mentioned about the role parents play in teaching their children to read. So do most of them even understand what their role is? And what are the most common mistakes that they make?
I think parents are highly intelligent, and I think that they want the best for their children. And with the best intentions of the world, they want to prepare them for kindergarten and they want to prepare them for life. But again, how do you know how to prepare your children if you don't have all of the information at hand? And so if we teach parents how to make reading comprehension a part of their everyday life, in the same way that parents teach their children to listen and they teach them to hear what's being said. So they also need to teach their children to read and to understand what they're reading. Parents will do a much better job at home if they're armed with the right tools. Oftentimes as adults, we forget how difficult it is to read because we take it for granted. We do it automatically, but that automaticity, as we call it, can get in the way. And so one of the aspects of this may be difficult to read, I put together 15 different examples that parents can read that will walk them through what their children experience when their children try to read. Because again, sometimes we forget how hard it is for children to learn to read. And so this allows parents to think as their child would think and learn as their child would learn, and often gives them more empathy because we've forgotten how hard it is.
That's right. And English is certainly not an easy language. I actually had read through the book myself, and it really was very interesting because, as you said, we forget, we can read now, we can understand, but we forget how hard it is to learn. So what are some of the myths about what works and what doesn't work when teaching reading to your children?
Well, so for example, I mentioned already, just saying the words out loud doesn't necessarily mean you can read. It just means you can say the words out loud. Reading has to include comprehension. Another possible myth, the book starts with 10 facts or myths, and not to ruin the book for the audience or for the reader, but so one of the myths is that people believe that smaller words are easier to read. So what do you think? Are smaller words easier to read?
Well, I read the book, so no.
It turns
Not
out
necessarily, anyway, not
right.
necessarily.
Some small words are easier to read, but we can't judge a word by its size because some words are impossibly hard to read. So, for example, words like I, EYE, there's no way to figure that one out if you're using phonics to try and decode it. It's not going to happen. So how do we judge the quality of a book? How do we judge how hard it is for children to read? So the facts and myths really incorporate the idea that the more ideas you put into a sentence, the harder it is for a child to comprehend. Another myth, is it cheating? A fact or a myth? Is it cheating if your child looks at the pictures while trying to read? And so many parents cover up the picture. It's the first thing they do when the child's trying to read. And of course, we use all kinds of tricks to try and help us when we're not sure what's going on. And that's a brilliant strategy for children. That shows how intelligent they are, not that they're trying to cheat necessarily. And so looking at the pictures is not cheating when you're trying to read. One of the myths that trips up a lot of people, is it cheating if you read to your child rather than your child reads to you?
Yeah.
And again, we're talking about reading comprehension. So if we can lift the cognitive load for children and let them listen to the words rather than have to decode them all, it gives them an opportunity to focus more on reading comprehension. So no, it's definitely not cheating. In fact, why not do it? Why not make it fun to read a book with your child instead of having your child suffer through word by word and not really know what's going on?
So, yeah, so going along with that, do you think that some of the problem has to do at all with what children are reading?
So there's so many wonderful books out there, and there's so many wonderful families. You know, whatever children want to read, honestly, whatever they want to read should be a motivating tool to get them to start reading. You know, just pick up a chapter book and start reading it as a family. Discuss what could happen, what potentially might happen. Go around the family and let everybody predict what might happen next. Make it into an adventure at dinner time. Sit around the table and talk about the characters. For instance, I mean, some of the classics, like Anne of Green Gables. Why did Anne Shirley dye her hair? What on earth happened there? And that's something fun to talk about because we all make mistakes and we all do silly things from time to time. And so it opens up a whole conversation. You know, in terms of, say, Tom Sawyer, another classic, well, he was a genius. So what could you do in order to make your life more exciting when you don't want to do chores? So there's lots of conversations that can come out of any book and any story. So read anything, read everything.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. So do you feel that it's too late to correct this situation? Why don't you talk to us about some of the solutions? You know, how do you do that, and why is it? Or now, how do you instill in children a love for reading? You know, what are some of the solutions?
Was when we bear in mind that let's talk about the problems and then how to solve them. And so one problem is that children don't necessarily want to read. Reading involves active participation, whereas we like to be passive. It's easier to watch television than it is to decode and figure out and pay attention. And so we want to make reading more fun. We want to forget about the difficulties involved in decoding and focus on the exciting adventure that words can open up for us. And so we want to create a need to read. And when we do that, we have a purpose behind reading. And so we're highly motivated to be successful. So for example, with younger children, create a shopping list and do it with words and pictures. Always make it foolproof so that if the picture is there, a child can see the picture and associate the word with it. Because in that way, it makes it more exciting for children, then they're more likely to be successful. You can put them on postcards and take the postcards to the supermarket and then go and match up the food with the word. That way, it'll help children to figure out how to decode and what reading is all about. Put notes at the dinner table. There's nothing more fun than getting a note. Put notes in lunch boxes. Just simple notes with simple words. And we talk about, in the book, it talks about phonetically friendly words. For children who have difficulty reading, pick a phonetically friendly word. So something that you can actually sound out more easily, like look, L-O-O-K. You can sound that one out. It's not complicated, but we mentioned short words like I or the before. Those are a little bit more complicated. So stick to the easy words so that your child's more likely to be able to read the note, and put a little picture with the note so that it makes more sense. And keep encouraging, from the small notes to, bigger books, keep encouraging your child to want to read and to want to comprehend what's going on.
Yeah, those sound like really great ideas. Make it more fun. You talk about understanding the learning process through the child's eyes, since we have forgotten how difficult it is to learn to read. So what are some ways that you can do that?
Read the book. So there are 15
They're going to read the book.
So there are 15 different
just a couple of examples.
Sure, let me give you some examples. So for instance, there's a passage. Do we have time for me to read it?
Sure.
Okay, so there's a passage. This is wonderful research by Bransford and Johnson. And so I'm going to read you a story, and afterwards I'm going to ask you to remember the story and write it down. So the procedure is actually quite simple. First, you arrange items into different groups. Of course, one pile may be sufficient depending on how much there is to do. If you have to go somewhere else due to lack of facilities, that's the next step. Otherwise, you're pretty well set. It is important not to overdo things. That is, it's better to do a few things at once than too many. In the short run, this may not seem important, but complications can easily arise. A mistake can be expensive as well. At first, the whole procedure will seem complicated. Soon, however, it will become just another facet of life. It is difficult to foresee any end to the necessity for this task in the immediate future, but then one can never tell. So now, how much of that made any sense at all? The truth of the matter is, you know exactly what this is, and you could write down every single detail if you had one missing piece of information. And the missing piece of information is the title. So if I give you the title and then I read just one or two sentences again, watch and see how different the experience is. The washing clothes passage. The procedure is actually quite simple. First, you arrange the items into different groups. Of course, one pile may be sufficient, depending on how much there is to do. And so you can see that just by having the title, it allows you to access all the background knowledge that you didn't actually access before. And the point here is, you knew everything you needed to know in order to read that passage, but you didn't think of bringing it to the story. And the same thing happens with exams, at the college level, or even at the high school or elementary school level. Oftentimes you have the information, but you don't realize you need to bring it with you. And so accessing the right information is crucially important.
Right. Oh, that was great. So I know you did a ton of research for this book, and you mentioned one piece of research, but can you tell us about how you were able to gather all this different research, and what were some of the sources for that research?
Sure. So some of the research I did with my advisor when I had done my PhD, Harriet Waters. And so we ran a research study on inconsistency detection, because it turns out poor readers don't necessarily notice mistakes if they're embedded in a story. And so we had a story about Tiddles the cat, who was watching out the window as children skated on a frozen pond while fish jumped up and down in the water. And so clearly fish can't jump in water if it's frozen and children are skating on it, and vice versa. And so what's going on with children's reading skills? Why are they not noticing that there are massive problems? There's another example in the literature. That research actually came from research by Ellen Markman. There's other research where a little boy goes to the dentist, sits down at the chair, watches his hair get shorter and shorter, pays the barber and leaves. And so clearly the story went wrong somewhere, because he went from the dentist to the barber in a very short space of time. And so why are children not noticing these inconsistencies? It turns out proposition integration is a critical part of reading. And if we don't integrate propositions, we don't necessarily follow what's happening in a story. So if you've ever done a lateral thinker, Like there's one that says a man was born before his mother, married his father, and everybody considered him normal. What's going on there? And so it turned out he was a priest. And so when we as adults don't incorporate propositions, it doesn't make sense to us. Children don't necessarily know that they need to integrate propositions. And so one simple solution is just to tell them. So that research, I did myself with Harriet Waters. There's other research out there. It's all in the journals. And because I teach cognitive psychology, I've been collecting it for the last 10 years or so and thinking about how to put it together in a reasonable format that parents might enjoy. I've given lectures and workshops before COVID. I've gone across the country giving lectures and workshops, and honestly, they're so well received and people are astounded by the information, but it's been there for years. We've known this information for years. Jean Piaget's research from the 1950s, it's out there. We know about it, but we need to communicate it better. And so this may be difficult to read as an attempt to give parents the missing information that they need to help them to turn their homes into an ecosystem where really learning is a byproduct of fun, where they can have adventures with their children. It doesn't take anything new. Look, people lead frenetic lives these days. They work, they clean, they cook, they take care of their children, all those after school activities. And so when are they going to find time to add more into their routine? Frankly, they're not. And the book isn't asking them to. This may be difficult to read, says change what you're doing and incorporate these ideas into your naturally existing schedule. When you're sitting at the dinner table, use a paper mat, take out a pencil and just write double O. Write 2 O's all the way down the page. And with preschoolers who are just focusing on reading and learning to read, let them make up words that have ooh in them. Ooh for look, ooh for book. Have fun with it. Dr. Seuss had great fun with it. You can turn your dinner time into a Dr. Seuss time. It makes it exciting. It makes it interesting. Children want to engage in it. And honestly, that's what's missing. Use the research and incorporate it into your daily life. And again, create that need to read in your home.
I think this is really great information that really all parents need to hear. We're almost out of time. So is there one last thing that you'd like to share, Claire?
Sure. If you look ahead and you think about what your child will accomplish in my college classroom, we want all students to succeed. But learning doesn't really begin when children step into my classroom. It doesn't begin when children step foot in kindergarten. It starts the day they're born. And there's so much that we can do, both talking and listening, reading to our children and teaching our children to read to us. It's an adventure. But instead of focusing on what goes wrong, let's focus on what we can do correctly. I mentioned at the end of the book, my youngest just went off to college. And when you say goodbye to your children after 18 really long and arduous years, it could be bitterly disappointing or bittersweet to say goodbye to them if you just focused on getting them to college. The truth of the matter is you have to enjoy every minute of every day. Make each day something special. Make it an adventure. Have fun with your children and enjoy learning and really watching life through their eyes, because they see the world differently. And if we can understand how they see the world, then we can teach them not just to read, but how to enjoy life and to grow into successful adolescents and adults.
Oh, that's really beautiful, Claire. So I'm so sorry that we're out of time. It went so quickly, but thanks again to Dr. Claire Rubman. And again, her book is This May Be Difficult to Read. And I'd say that it is required reading for anyone who's interested in literacy and how we teach our children. So again, I'm Barbara Wilkov, and thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Thanks again, Claire.
Thank you so much for having me.